All right, everybody. I'm really excited today with our expert guest is here. Sandra is going to be giving a talk on neuro um, uh, diversity and in entrepreneurship, which I'm really excited about because there's so many of us who have we're struggling in a corporate environment and now are in a entrepreneurial environment, and there's some similarities there, there's a lot of differences there, and she's going to talk to us all about navigating the world when your brain is not typical. It has a textbook definition, which no one really is, so that's why I'm really excited about this. So Sandra, I'm going to be quiet and let you run the show.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, and hello everybody. So as you heard, I'm Sandra. I just said it, I'm from France, but I live in Germany and I work with international clients. And I've been coaching for at least 7 years now, after changing my career I first started in a digital environment, working for agencies worldwide, international clients, lots of great projects, great teams. But at some point, I wanted something more meaningful. And I already had that in mind when I was a student, but I thought being 20 and coaching is maybe not the best option. So my goal was to work and then coach. And when I started coaching, I realized that a lot of my clients were different. They were thinking differently. And it brought me to think, how so? And I discovered myself that I'm neuroatypical. So I got the tests for giftedness, and I might have attention deficit, but I haven't gotten all the tests yet. So we suppose, but we're not sure. And this is something that is very similar to my clients. They usually come to me and say, hey, something is different with me and nobody really understands. So let's work together and see if there is anything. And this is what we do. So my goal today is really to talk about neurodiversity, answer your questions. Do not hesitate to write in the chat or to ask me anything, because my goal is really to make sure that this is something that is better known, that people can work with that and understand that they are not different or they are not normal. It's just another way of thinking, living, and working in our case. Okay, so how many of you identify as neurodivergent? Yeah.
Can you define that a little bit more?
Yes, I will. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to share a presentation. You see my screen? You do, right? Yeah. Okay. So I already talked a bit about myself, so I'm going to skip that and go to neurodiversity. Neuro is for neurological, and diversity, I mean different ways of functioning. When we talk about neurodiversity, it's really anybody. We all think differently. Our brains work differently because it's linked to our culture, our education, what we learn at school, our background. So there's many, many things leading to the fact that we all think differently. Then we have what we call neurodivergence or neuroatypy. It means something is different in our brain, and this is physical. It's really, the imagery shows that the brain is different and is working differently. I listed a few names here. The best known is autism and Asperger, and autism was discovered in the 90s by Judy Singer, and because she's on the spectrum as well, so autistic spectrum, and she wrote our PhD about that. And this is how the whole neurodiversity movement started. And with the time, researchers discovered that there is more to neurodiversity. It's not only autism, it's also ADHD, so attention deficit with or without hyperactivity. There is giftedness. There are lots of learning difficulties like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and so on. And there is also the Tourette syndrome. There is a debate right now whether or not depression, being bipolar, and that kind of things also count into neurodiversity. Some say yes, some others say no. It's really still a debate. So officially, these are the ones counting as neuroatypical or neurodivergent. I listed a quick definition for the most common ones, at least the one that we saw more often in entrepreneurship or in companies. So we have dyslexia, which is a difficulty to read and write and understand everything. It can be very complex. So I'm not going to go into details, but it's just usually when kids have real problem learning how to write and doing a lot of spelling mistakes and so on. This is dyslexia. We have gifted people. Usually it's a very high IQ, but not only. It's linked to a high sensitivity. It's also a different way of processing information. So usually people have this thought that it could be like Einstein, but not all gifted people are such genius. Usually it's really just a different way of thinking. Attention deficit is really about having difficulties to focus. And there is sometimes also hyperactivity, which could be physical or neurological, meaning like thinking the whole time without stopping and at a speed that is very unusual. The autism spectrum is linked to a different way of processing everything that comes from the senses and emotions and so on. And some can be considered as people with a handicap, but some others not at all. So it's really depending on where we are on the spectrum. And this is something we have with all the rest. What I didn't write in here and comes next is high sensitivity. This is something that those profiles have in common, is that they usually are highly sensitive. High sensitivity was also discovered in the 90s by Ellen Aron, who is an American researcher. And she discovered that we have the 5 senses are more sensitive. So usually people say that they hear certain sounds, for example, electricity. Some people can hear electricity, are very bothered by noise, have a hard time working in a open space. But this is really all senses, meaning maybe it's the noise, maybe it's the smell, it could be touching. For example, people having trouble with some kind of t-shirts, shirts, and so on. And there is the smell could also be very, very strong. And this is together with really strong emotions. I'm going to say a bit more about that. Or do you have any questions until now? Learning, okay, I see Sarah, learning disability, slow scanning speed, yeah, gifted epilepsy, yeah. Yeah, this is something that we can share right now, is most of the time people don't only have one type of neurodiversity, but several ones. That's why, for example, I'm working with a lot with ADHD, and I have a lot of them being on the spectrum, being gifted, having, for example, the dyslexia. So it's really many different things at the same time. It can be, it's not always the case, but it can also be. And I like what you wrote about not defining yourself as neurodivergent, and we're going to go back to it maybe later. Here is a bit more about high sensitivity. Sorry. So this is really the brain, how it works. It's gonna get more information than typical people, meaning you're gonna hear probably a bit more or see more details than other people, and so on and so on. So you're gonna notice a lot of information, and you're gonna process them in a deeper way because you have more connection in your brain, which leads to overstimulation. This is a lot to process, and the brain is made in a way that it can be very overwhelmed by all those stimulation, no matter if we are talking about emotions, of stimuli, of real information, facts. One thing, for example, is what you see here in the middle of the brain. This is a kind of tube, and I don't remember the name in English. This is bigger in the brain of neurodivergent people, meaning, I'm sorry? Oh, I thought somebody said something. Meaning you really have physically, you receive more information to process. Emotional reactivity and empathy is also because the brain is made differently. You have a lot of people saying they come into a room and they already know if some people feel good, feel bad, if there is stress or not. And there is a lot of sensing the subtle, meaning we just can't explain it, but we know a few things and we just don't know how. It's just because we receive more information and our senses are, let's say, it's not really higher, but just working differently. Which means often we end up like that because it's just too much. So having that much information to process leads our brain to, it leads us to increase the stress level. So it's really hard. For example, if you have somebody working in an open space, it's noisy, maybe it doesn't smell very good because the kitchen is nearby, and this person can feel people's emotion. It increases the stress and leads to needing to be alone. In the best case, when we recognize it, we need to be alone, but it can also lead to fights or to conflicts within a company, and so on and so on. The challenges as an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is already a challenge. You probably all know about that. It can be difficult to build a company. We might have some specific skills, but not always, for example, for management, market research, or whatever. When we're neurodivergent, usually it's because we don't fit into the classical workplace. And also maybe because we have great ideas and we want to develop something, and it's just another way of working. What we noticed is neurodivergent people communicate differently, just because this is another way of working. So how can I do it when I have my own business to communicate properly with my partners, with my clients, and so on? It's also hard to trust and understand others because we usually think, because of the way we were educated, that maybe something is wrong with us. It was already strange at school, maybe we already had some difficulties, and what about now? Does it come from me, from the others? Why don't I understand what they want? Or why do they not understand me? Here also, communication is a broad topic. So there are problems already between people overall, no matter if they are neurodivergent or not. So it just adds to the difficulty. Organizing a business can be very challenging. Some profiles can be very organized. For example, I have some gifted people who are really well organized and they have their to-do list, they know what they have to do when and so on. But not always, especially creative people or people with attention deficit. They have great ideas, but it's really hard for them to keep a certain structure, not to forget an appointment or know when they have to deliver something. Education and culture plays a huge role in it, in how we use neurodiversity as an advantage or not. And this is the same with any other client. It's just a bigger challenge for neurodiverse entrepreneurs. Usually we're talking about people who are over adapting because the system is not made to be creative and think outside of the box. Maybe it's different in the US, but at least in European culture, we have to fit in. We have to fit in the workplace. Even as an entrepreneur, we have to fit to the idea of what is entrepreneurship. What is it to build a business? What do we need as skills and so on and so on. The importance of others is really, really high. And this is basically something that a human being needs because we're social animals. It's even stronger with neurodivergent people. The search for meaning, respect, and the sense of justice is really high. So we usually have people who want to change something, who want to be involved in something meaningful, whatever meaning means for them. But this is really important to have that. Because this is also what I see as a big challenge for people being employed in companies. Difficulty of adapting, although they tend to over-adapt, but it takes a lot of energy and at some point they just cannot anymore. And you have a lot of people having a burnout because of that. And the overstimulation, how to make sure that the brain is not overstimulated and that the stress level remains in the green zone. I just see a comment from Mike. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are somewhere neurodivergent. Yeah, whether they're gifted, hyper-focused, or simple didn't fit. Yes, corporate word. However, I've met so many entrepreneurs that didn't know anything about neurodivergence. Just felt like they didn't belong and no other choice. Exactly. Yeah. This is something, and this is the reason why I try to talk about that topic on a regular basis, is because it's not something really known, and a lot of people feel different but cannot put words on it. And for some people, it's okay. They can live with that and they're fine with it. And some others need to have an explanation and a word. A lot of my highly sensitive clients, when I tell them what it could be and why it's like that, and that it's just physical because the brain is different, usually they feel relieved because there is an explanation. They don't feel like aliens anymore because many other people are the same. I grew up as gifted, but wasn't diagnosed ADD until I was adult. Yes, yes. I believe that for ADD, it's really a relief to know about that. And it helps developing strategies to make everyday life way easier. Yeah, I do understand that. Okay. Neurodiversity at work. I integrated it because there was this question about when we have neurodivergent employees. First of all, it's really interesting to see that neurodiversity was compared to biodiversity in nature, meaning it is something that we need as human beings. It has brought a lot of creativity and innovation and so on. Meaning, in a work context, usually it helps having new perspectives and develop creativity. It also helps innovation and agility. It also helps working in teams, retaining talents, managing people, because usually we have really empathetic people who can understand the needs of a team. So really, it's about being open and understand that we usually talk about skills in a company. No matter if we're talking about being an entrepreneur or working in a company, we talk about skills like maybe I'm good at organizing things. Maybe I'm good at communicating. I don't know, I'm a programmer. Maybe I can develop some great softwares. Why don't we do the same with neurodiversity? Each person is individual. Each person has a personality, has great skills, and being neurodivergent just explains certain ways of thinking. Okay, evaluation. How do adults get diagnosed? I'm going to go back to this afterwards. Challenges for companies, and it might be helpful for you if you have employees. This is identifying the neurodivergent profiles. But again, we are all different. So I think it's really being open-minded, having a culture that where you accept people, where tolerance is one of the values, because it's really important to understand everybody is unique and different, and that's okay. So starting from there, it's easier to open up and talk about some difficulties. For example, we were talking about attention deficit. There are great strategies for people with ADD. For example, partnering up with somebody else that is more organized, or maybe having that kind of profiles more with client contacts, and so on and so on. So really open up about that can be an encouragement for others, and can be very a solution to find strategies to cope with that. Adapting processes. For example, if I have dyslexia and I have this long text, it can be difficult for me to apply because I'm not going to want to read until the end. Effective communication, like for any other jobs. Having a very diverse and respectful environment. Making sure I can reduce overstimulation. Meaning having maybe a place where people can just rest. If I can work in home office, it's just great because I can, I don't have to constantly have noise and smell and people around. Sometimes it's good, and sometimes people just need to relax and reduce their stress level. The sense of meaning doesn't only mean doing something meaningful and impactful. In a way, we see it like the big meaning of life. It can also be for some tasks. If I don't understand what I need to do this report, I'm not going to do it, or I'm not going to do it very well. So it's important also to know, why do I need to explain that to someone? To explain this meaning. Why is it important to do something or to do it that way? And leave some freedom to interpret it, to develop it in a different way. Perfectionism and attention to details is very common, but not always. A lot do have that in some areas of their life, but there are some other areas they don't care. It's fine. It's just, for example, someone with ADHD might not always go into detail. Someone who is gifted might do it more often. And high stress, but I guess it's also very cultural, right? We're in societies where we have a lot to do. We have to deal with many different things, many different roles. And it's just that neurodivergent people tend to get a higher stress level more, let's say, faster than other people. Okay, and now for entrepreneurs. It's really just a few tips because it depends on what kind of neurodiversity we're talking about. And it depends on your environment and what you need and so on. But first of all, it's important to recognize and accept the own pattern. Even if you don't want to identify as neurodivergent, that's fine. It's just about knowing yourself. How do you think? How do you work? What kind of things do you like doing? And what do you do well? Understand the triggers is really important to reduce the stress. But in the end, this is like, you're unique. So what is it that triggers you? Or how do you feel your sensitivity? Or where do you feel it's sometimes a bit difficult for you to cope with certain things at work? Talk about strength instead of deficit. As I said, it's really about, we all have skills. And when we go somewhere and we say, okay, I'm great in marketing, or I'm so creative, I'm a great designer, we're talking about strength and skills. We're not talking about, for example, I'm really bad in Excel, or figures are no interest for me. So it's really shifting our mindset and focusing on what we can do well. Do not hesitate to collaborate with people with complementary skills. And actually, this is what we see in companies as well. I don't know if some of you work with the team management system. This is a wheel where you have different categories of skills. You have 8 of them. And to be successful in a team or in a company, it's good to have all 8 of them, from creativity to developing, prototyping, organizing, controlling, selling, and so on. Is just because we need several skills. And as an entrepreneur, it can be very lonely, and it's good to reach out and try to partner up with people. The rest is probably like the basics in life anyway. Develop a healthy lifestyle. Through the sensitivity, it's important to eat healthy. You have a lot of neurodivergent people having, for example, allergies. So it's really good to do sports, to eat well, to have an environment that is positive, that is going to have a positive impact on your life too. So positive environment, and adapt the routine to your requirements. For example, here we're talking about neurodivergence. We could be talking about biorhythm. This would be the same. Like, your body needs something, your brain needs something. How can you organize your day so that you feel good, so that it fits to your needs? I'm finishing that, and then I'm going to answer the comments. Sport and creative activities are linked to returning to feeling and sensing. To make sure that the stress level goes down, it's important to go back to your body. So mindfulness is a wonderful way to do it. Sport is great. Activity, like creative activities, are great because this way you use different parts of your brain, you go back in your body, and it's going to lower your stress level. Okay, that would be it on my side. This is very short. I wanted to give you a few information that you can use for your everyday life, but I think it's way better if we talk about it and if you ask your question. So I hope that's fine. And I'm gonna start with what you said, Mike. When I was working in a corporate environment, I was always incredibly frustrated because I didn't think others were moving fast enough. Yes, huge problem. Yeah, I was able to hyper focus on something and get projects done, and others couldn't, and I never understood why. Once I connected those dots, it made it easier. Yes, exactly. This is interesting because I had a coaching right before with a client who has autistic, is on the spectrum, and has ADHD. And we were talking about being in a meeting, and like in 5 minutes, you already know the answer. You already know what you have to do. You can have a clear list of things to be done. The rest of the team needs 1 hour to get there. And it's just because their brain works differently, they need more time. This can be so frustrating, but knowing that helps getting more patience, wait, and then meet them there when they found the solution. It can be for them also very overwhelming if you start and tell them, well, you know, this is the solution, we do it. Usually you get, no way, it's never going to work. And they are going to list why it's not going to work. And a few days later, they're going to come back, oh, I have a great idea. And this is exactly what you said before. Yeah. So very frustrating. And I see Jackie and Annika said the same. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting how, like, I growing up, I was always, you might have autism and you need to be in a special classroom because you learn slowly, or you're Mozart. There's no in between.
Yeah.
Or normal, quote unquote, like you're in the, and I think it was and that bucket of normal, of if you don't, there's something wrong with you if you're not a part of this pack. And I think that's what I love so much about this topic, is that, and I keep saying this over and over again, but so many of us were so frustrated in an environment that we just didn't fit in. And we may have been fired for it. We may have quit for it. We may have just been miserable for decades.
Yes.
Not knowing why. And I think it's so interesting that it's not necessarily an answer. It's more of a path to an answer. And maybe you never get an answer, but there is no normal. No one's brain, there's no normal brain. So
that is exactly what I like about neurodiversity, is people assume that we are all similar. Maybe we are, but we are also all unique. And the statistics show, that neurodivergent people would be a minority. But what we have to know about those statistics is, first of all, it's only about people getting a diagnosis. And a lot of people never get a diagnosis. And then within those statistics, if there are two types of neurodiversity, then you don't count. So if you check, there was research in Canada, and they came to the conclusion that actually there would be around 52% of neuroatypical people. So this wouldn't be an exception anymore. This would be the norm. Or maybe the norm is that we need to accept the differences, and that's fine, instead of trying to put everybody in a box. So hopefully things are going to change. And this is why I think it's really important to talk about that in our personal environment and at work, to make sure people understand that it's okay to think differently. And right now there is really a trend from big companies. They try to hire neurodivergent profiles because some statistics showed that it leads to more innovation, agile ways of working, talent retention. And suddenly they said, oh, maybe that's good. Yeah. There was the question about the diagnosis. I don't have anything for the States, but usually you have some associations where you could ask. And it should be done by, in Europe, at least this is from psychologists who have a specific training to conduct those tests. So you really need to check if this person is, I don't know how it's called, but is allowed to conduct those tests. And for ADHD, this is a bit like a test. You're going to have a few things. You're going to say yes or no. And depending on the results, then you will have an average, and you're going to be more or less ADHD. And again, this is something you don't have just one way of being it, you have many different ways. So this is the hard part too. It's hard to get a diagnosis. This is the same for being gifted. You have an IQ, but actually it doesn't say enough about the fact about being gifted or not, because to that you have a way of processing the information. You can have this IQ and not processing it in a way gifted people do it. You have the sensitivity, and this sensitivity is usually part of all of them, of having ADHD, having a dyslexia, and so on. Do you have any questions or comments? Maybe something that got a bit clearer after the presentation?
Why do you think? So I have some people, and one person in particular in my social network who oftentimes when she posts something, she's talking about how she is neurodivergent. What do you think the benefits are of creating a label like that on yourself? And I'm very open about my learning disability and my epilepsy, even when I'm talking to the audience that I talk to, even though it has, well, the learning disability part has something to do with it, but my epilepsy has only to do with making sure that I don't take on too much and workload and talk about workload balance with the people that I talk to who are in a very specific tech industry.
Well, the label question is a very good one because I think it's very personal. I think it's more about discovering how we work. Some people need a label to feel normal or to find answers. The thing is, what I think is it shouldn't be an excuse and say, you know, I'm like that because I'm highly sensitive. But more, okay, because I'm highly sensitive, I might be overwhelmed by the noise. What can I do? Or for example, I do a lot of career coaching. And when people come, there was this lady, for her, touching is very strong. So instead of saying, okay, it's very annoying and I cannot wear everything I want and so on. Okay, that's annoying. Good. But it was more, what can I do with that? Do I want to use it at work, for example? And she did this training to do some massage. So I think it's more about understanding our own functioning and talking about it. I think it's a way, at least for me, to make people aware of the different ways of functioning and that it's okay, and not having to stigmatize because they feel different, and not discriminating because they might not fit into one box. So I think if this person you're talking about wants to talk about it, it's probably because she really maybe wants to make an impact, or maybe it's about awareness. Sometimes people do it to just express things that are frustrating. So I think it's very personal. Does it answer your question?
Yes.
A bit, yeah? Okay. And the online test, you do have some, in English, I wouldn't know exactly where, but I know you have some in French and German, so I'm pretty sure you do have it in English. If we have it in other languages, English is probably going to be there. You do have some, but it's still, as long as it's not made by a psychologist, it gives an indication, but you still need to go to a psychologist, because when they do the test, they also observe how you think, how you move, how long does it take for you to answer some questions. And this is key in diagnosing ADHD and giftedness and dyslexia might be a bit different, but it's really important for them to observe like the way you do, if you move a lot or not. So there are criteria you cannot have in a test like that. Is there any other question?
So I think that something that I've experienced working with different entrepreneurs is I have a lot of entrepreneurs come to me who are neurodivergent and very high performers and are left corporate because people weren't working fast enough, and they had all these great ideas that they never got to pursue. So they started their own company to do all of that. And now it's time to hire employees. And they don't really understand that they're different. So when they hire employees, they're incredibly frustrated. Yeah. They're like, my employees aren't moving fast enough. That like, and I give them a to-do list of 47 things, and I don't know why all of it's not done by lunchtime. I would get at the reason I hired them, I could do it by lunchtime. Yeah. And I think, so what advice would you have to a high performer who's thinking about, and maybe even also someone with ADD or struggles a little bit with time management or organization, like both sides, I guess, of what is your advice on hiring and creating an environment where you almost have to look in a mirror first in order to hire someone and say, this person's going to complement my strengths, but I also can't take out my frustrations on them, like I may have done in corporate. Like,
yeah, that's a really good question, both of them. So if I take the first question about people who are thinking very fast, like high achiever. First of all, it's really important to understand how we work and that not everybody can work as fast. So if I want to hire people, what is my goal? Usually it's because either I want to delegate, I really want them to do things like me, and then it might be a way to, or it might be worth wondering, do I want somebody who works as fast as I do? Or do I need complementary skills? And then I need to work on my passion, because if they do something that I cannot do well, or that I could do maybe fast, but the quality is not there. Like, what do I want? Is it the speed? Is it the quality? Is it something that I wouldn't do myself because I don't enjoy it and I always procrastinate? So really, what is my goal there? And then understand that most effective teams are with very different people. I cannot expect from them to be exactly the same as I am and to think the same way, because otherwise it's really like you only have one set of skills, but you need several for a business to be successful. So it's really, what is the goal? And patience. For the second one, when it comes to organization, it also depends on the type. I do have some who work great with post-its because they are very visual and they need to have those post-its and they have different colors and so on, and it works. I have one, for example, post-its. She has some everywhere in her apartment, everywhere at work. It just doesn't work. So what we developed is, luckily right now, thanks to our smartphones, our computers, and all those great reminders and calendar functions, she gets a reminder, because for her the sound works well. So she needs something with the sound. And then it's written, I don't know, maybe call client, whatever. We even did that for her daily routine, like put something in her phone. You can record your voice and say, for example, you have to prepare this thing. And she had that at the very same time every day, because otherwise she wouldn't do what she had to. And for her, this was something very important and she had to do it. So it's really about trying different strategies and figuring out what works best for you. And it can be having papers all around your desk. And it could be having everything in your computers and with links. And most of us, or even my clients, work best with calendars and reminders. But again, maybe Post-it is the solution. Or maybe I had this one CEO, he had to work with a personal assistant, and she was his brain. And there was no way for him, even with reminders, he would look at it, oh yeah, right, I need to do it. And then he would do something else and forget about it. So without his personal assistant, it was very, very difficult. And she was the only one to know that he had an attention deficit. And she would organize everything. She would tell him, you have to go into this cab right now. He would say, yeah, okay, because he would trust her 100%. And once in the cab, the driver would know where he had to bring him, because if he would ask, he was like, yeah, I know, I need to go somewhere. I don't remember. So really, there are not one strategy, there are many options, and you need to see what works best. I see several heads doing like that. It seems to be familiar to some of you. A bit.
You know, I think the real value of this is like having a language and words to actually talk about it and communicate about it effectively is so powerful, because otherwise there's just the frustration around the behaviors and no real way to talk about it. So this is really great, just hearing these different situations described and the ways that people can strategize to work with it, as opposed to just being pissed off and frustrated. You know, like I don't know if I'm neurodivergent. I'm not sure. I've never really looked into that before. But when Mike was talking about feeling like frustrated at work by you're going fast and nobody else is going fast enough, I was talking to my dad a couple of weeks ago, who, while he supports me being an entrepreneur, he has no idea what that means, right? And he's baffled by it. But when we were talking about why I'm doing this, he's like, you know, you've always been bored at any job you've ever had. Like you're there and it's fun in the beginning, and then you figure out how to do it super efficiently, and then you get bored. And I'm like, that's how he saw it. And, you know, I would describe it as frustrating, as Mike did. But yeah, I can totally see how like having a more comprehensive language to talk about this makes the conversations more rich, and it enriches our experience, you know, by extension.
Yeah. In that case, sometimes it's also being I'm going to try to say it properly, multi-potentialists. Yeah, having several, or generalists. These are people who need to do a lot of different things, and they're good at a lot of different things, because otherwise they get bored, and that's okay. And that's is just a way of working, which is not always, at least it hasn't been easy, but it's changing, because you need that kind of profiles to manage complex projects, and to have this creativity and understanding people and so on. And that's okay. It's also a different way. And I can relate to what you're saying, because I used to be a product and project manager in the digital industry. It was always fun at the beginning. And once the product was out and it was only maintaining it, this was boring. And I needed something else. And that's okay. And this is the best part of being an entrepreneur. You get to do so many things and discover so many things and learn. And usually learning is a big part as well in the life of neurodivergent people. Mm-hmm.
How many people, like you said, you thought that they studied 52% of people are neurodivergent? I think we're all, I mean, it's kind of a interesting term, because I think I know everybody learns and thinks and works differently. So what would you consider typical?
I don't know what is typical, and this is a very good question. And this is why I started with saying we are all unique and neurodiverse. I mean, I have probably 90% of neurodivergent clients now, but even in the past, when it was a bit less, like neurotypical people would think differently as well, because they have their own history, they have their own trauma, they have their own interests, they studied different things. So in the end, it's just about, seeing the individual in front of you with his specificities and skills. And so that's why I use the word neurodivergent because I have to increase awareness, especially in companies, and to help people identify to it and understand that it's okay to think that way. But in the end, there is just not one type. It's, yeah. I see a lot of nodding. Yeah.
I'd be interested to read a profile of, now that you expanded my definition of neurodivergent, which I always just associated with autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would like to see a profile of someone who's neurotypical, because like I said, it seems like we're all weirdos.
We can say that way, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see. I mean, I like also this example of you have some people being more introverts, and some others are more extroverts, and that's okay. And just the rest, I mean, just to see this difference. Some are shy, some are not, some are not. So actually, there should be a conversation about how to cope with one's own personality and strength, and what do we want to improve, more than this is what I am. I'm neurodivergent, I'm gifted, I have ADHD, dyslexia, whatever. It's more like, who am I as an individual, and how do I function, and what do I need to be successful and happy in life, and cope with stress. At least this is my view.
You know, I think that's a really important point, that these labels, how we use them matters. You know, if we're using them as a tool for empowerment and to improve our lives and understand each other better, that's awesome. But the flip side is also true. It can be used as an excuse for a variety of things. You know, your mentioning of introversion really just brought something up, because the people that I help tend to be on the introverted side, and they tend to use that as an excuse for not networking and doing the relationship building that is necessary in order to improve your careers, you know, amongst other things. And it's an excuse. I am shy, I'm an introvert, I can't network. No, you can. It's a skill. You're using that as a reason to lean into your fear instead of leaning into your potential. So yeah, there's, you know, these tools in and of themselves are neutral, right? It's how we choose to use them that gives them power in one direction or another. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. This is, I think you chose the right word. It's about empowering people, or empowering ourselves to do things, and seeing how can I reach that. Maybe at the beginning, of course, it's going to be hard. And you have a lot of neurodivergent people, by the way, having a huge problem talking in front of other people. And I was the same, and I trained, and I did it anyway until it was easier. And I think it's the same with other skills. At the beginning, we cannot read, we cannot count. It's like a baby who's trying to walk. At the beginning, it's going to fall the whole time, and then it will walk. So I guess this is, do I want to do it? Who can I rely on while trying to reach this goal? Who can support me? We would have time for a last question. Does anyone have a question? No?
If someone is maybe like watches this and maybe says like, oh, I might be a little neurodivergent, what are next steps? Like what do they do at that point other than just suppress that feeling and put it under their bed and not touch it for 20 years? Like what do they do? Like what steps can they take?
I would say usually the first step is about recognizing the sensitivity. Most neurodivergent people that I have in coaching come to me because they sense they are more sensitive than average people. And usually I recommend to either read the book of Ellen Aron, The Highly Sensitive Person, and there is a test in there to get an idea how sensitive one person is. That would be the first step. And then it's really about researching because neurodivergence is really bright, you know. Maybe it's ADHD, maybe it's giftedness, maybe it's a dysfunction. It could be many different things. So researching, and if they feel it's not enough, then maybe looking for a psychologist or a coach who is specialized in that, because I think it can help to have another person, even if it's not a real diagnosis, but talking about it and seeing, is it neurodivergence? And very important, why would I want to know that? What is my goal behind it? Is it because I don't feel normal, or I have a lot of stress, or like, what is my motivation? Yeah. Okay. Would you like to write one last word in the chat? Maybe something that you learned today? Or you can even say it if you want, because we're not that many people. Like, what is the one thing you learned today and you didn't know about?
I learned a lot about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if there's one thing.
Okay, I extended my definition of neurodiversity. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And thanks, Mike. If you learned a lot, that's good. I gave also a lot of information. I hope it wasn't just too much at once, and you could process it.
Yeah, I think this was perfect. Thank you so much for doing this. And I'm sure if people have questions, they can tag you in the founders community and ask questions.
Sure, anytime.
Very cool. Well, thank you so
anytime.
much. This
Well,
was
thanks for
amazing.
organizing it. Really.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you to be here today and to have heard everything that I had to say, and sharing your stories and asking questions. It was a great evening for me, but for you, I think it's in the middle of the day. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Have a nice day.